Hilchos Shvisas Yomtiv Perek Shmini, the laws of resting on holidays, chapter 8. Today is the final chapter. We conclude the laws of resting on holidays with another chapter related to Chol Hamoed, the laws that govern how we should work during the intermediate days of the holidays of Sukkot and Pesach. And we conclude the chapter with a day that's related to Chol Hamoed, and that's the day of Erev Pesach, the eve of Pesach, which in many ways has the same laws as Chol Hamoed, as we shall see at the end of today's chapter. So we begin with laws related to agricultural work on Chol Hamoed. Says the Rambam, Halacha Aleph, Nehares HaMoishchin Min HaAgamim. If you have small rivers that are diverted from bigger ponds, you can see in the picture, you have a big pond on the right side, and it leads into a small channel of water. Mutar lahashkes mehen beis hashlachin b'moed. It's allowed for a person to water from these small channels a field that only relies on rainwater. Yesterday we defined this as the aretz hatzmeah. It's thirsty, it's parched land, because it only relies on the clouds, on the rain. And if there is no rain, you have to supplement it with water. So typically yesterday we learned that only under certain cases you're allowed to water such a field. So here the Rambam says another condition. If you have a channel that's diverted from a pond and it's kind of running right next to this parched land, you can water from that river this parched land. V'hu shalei pasku. That's provided that the water never stopped flowing. In other words, it never became stagnant. It's free flowing from the original pond and it continues to flow along where this Beit Hashlachin is. Because once it becomes stagnant water, then we saw yesterday, we really avoid drawing water from stagnant water because it's a lot of work. V'chein habrecha is so too a pool, she'amas hamayim meveres beinehen, where an irrigation ditch flows through these pools. Since the pools aren't stagnant, they're free flowing, mutar lahashkes mehen, it's allowed to water a nearby field from these little channels. Let's say you have a pool of water dripping from a parched piece of land that was irrigated, and it's still dripping. In other words, it was watered, irrigated so well that water is actually dripping out of the banks or the borders of this parched land. You can then take that water and irrigate with it another piece of parched land. Again, provided that the original stream, which is providing to the top or the higher up piece of parched land, never stopped. In other words, the condition in all the cases in this halacha is that the water has to be free flowing. So long as the water is free flowing, you can continue to make use of it. Halacha beis aruga shechetzia namuch v'chetzia gavaya. If you have a row or a piece of land where you're sowing crops, half of it is lower and half of it is higher. Today they call it actually terrace farming. This is where, this is full on, where you take a hill and you literally make different portions of the hill, planting different pieces of the hill. So the Rambam says, in such a case, lo yidla mimakim nomuch lahashkes makim gavaya. You cannot draw water from a place lower on the hill to irrigate a place higher up on the hill. Because that's a lot of work. And again, we avoid on Chol Hamoed doing lots of work. It is allowed for a person to draw water to irrigate vegetables that he will eat during Chol Hamoed. Sometimes vegetables could be near completion of their growth, and you water them a little bit. So long as you're going to make use of the results of your work on Chol Hamoed, that's allowed. If it's simply to make the vegetables more beautiful in their growth, but you're not planning to actually eat them on Chol Hamoed, then your work is of no benefit to the holiday. And we saw yesterday a number of times, if you're doing work that's not letzorech, not necessary for the festival, you cannot do it on Chol Hamoed. Gimel, one is not allowed to make round ditches at the roots of vines in order to allow them to fill up with water, retain the water, and it would help the watering process and the growth process of the vines. You cannot dig those ditches. It's a lot of work. But if the ditches were already in place and they simply got ruined, then you can fix them on Chol Hamoed. Similarly, if you have a water channel, a narrow water channel that got ruined, let's say some of the dirt on the banks caved in, and it's no longer flowing as it used to, one is allowed to fix this channel on Chol Hamoed. Ketzad, what does it look like to fix? So the Rambam says, Hoysa amuka tefach. If it was a tefach, a handbreadth, about 3-4 inches deep, chayfer ba'ad shisha. One is allowed to keep on digging until it becomes a depth of 6 tefachim. It's notable that 6 tfachim is the length of an amma. The name for this channel is amat hamayim, an amma of water, because it was usually an amma deep. So long as you have at least a tefach of depth, 1 handbreadth, you can keep digging to make it 6 tfachim deep. Hoisa amuka tifchayim, if it was already 2 tfachim, 2 handbreadths deep, ma'amika ad shiva, one can increase its depth till it's 7 tfachim deep. U'moishchenas hamayim me'ilan le'ilan, on a similar note, one is allowed to divert water within a big field of trees from one tree to another. Ubilvad shelo yashkeas kol hasoda, provided you don't irrigate the entire field. That's a lot of work, and looks like you're doing something during the weekday. But if the field was already moist, it was already well watered, mutar lahashkeas kula, then you can divert water from tree to tree till you actually water the entire field, because it already looks mostly watered. Umarbitzin es hasoda b'moed. You're also allowed to sprinkle a field with water on Chol Hamoed, either to settle the dust, like you would do in a home. We saw the other in Hilchos Shabbat. They used to sprinkle water on a dust floor, dirt floor, to settle it. You would do the same in the field. That's allowed. Because all the things in this halacha don't have much work involved, and therefore they're allowed. If you have plants that were not watered before Chol Hamoed, before the onset of the holiday, lo yashkem b'moed. Here is one case where you actually cannot irrigate them on Chol Hamoed. They require lots of water, and it's going to bring you to a lot of work. In this case, unfortunately, you have to leave the plants, and whatever happens after the holiday, if you can recover them, good. If not, not. On Chol Hamoed, you can't do anything. A river that's flowing, you can divert it from place to place, simply just to make the channel go in a different order, like the famous Mississippi River that runs across most of the United States. Over time, it was diverted many times and it changed courses. You can change the course of a river on Chol Hamoed, v'liftoyach nahar shenistam, and to open a river which was dammed. Pits, ditches, or water caves belonging to an individual. Yesterday we talked about ones belonging to the public. Public needs can always be attended to on Chol Hamoed. What if you have a water pit or something similar belonging to an individual? If the individual needed them on Chol Hamoed, you can clean them out, and you can smooth the cracks in them. But to dig them from anew, to begin with, initially you cannot dig them. If you already have a dug up pit or ditch, you can bring water into it on Chol Hamoed, even though you don't need the water on Chol Hamoed, because the work is in the digging of the pit. And that was already done. One is allowed to make a small pool on Chol Hamoed. The word nivreches is related to the Hebrew word brecha, which means pool. The Rambam elsewhere explains that this small pool was specifically made for soaking flax. You can make such a pool on Chol Hamoed. Halacha hey, achbarim shehin mafsidin esaylanis. If you have mice or other rodents damaging trees, you actually see this today, it's quite a common phenomenon, where they'll literally eat at the bottom of the tree, and it can cause big damage to the trees. So the Rambam says, tzadin oisan b'moed. You can trap them on Chol Hamoed, no problem. Bisdei ha'ilan, if it's a tree that's full of fields, a tree field, an orchard, tzad kedarka, you can actually trap mice in the way you would normally trap during the week. Ketzad, what does that look like? What's considered to be normal trapping in those days? Chayfer v'toila hametzuda. You can dig a hole and hang a net over it. They'll make a sort of a booby trap for the mice. And you can construct it in the normal way. If there was literally, sdei lavan translates as white field. If there was a white field near the tree field, typically white field is translated as a produce field, a grain field. It looks white from far, a wheat field looks all white. The Rambam himself, though, elsewhere writes that sdei lavan is actually a reference to an unplowed field. So if you had a sdei lavan next to this sdei ilan, next to this tree field, then tzadin oisan bisdei halavan bishinoi. So if you're trapping the mice in the nearby white field, again, either a grain field or an unplowed field, over there you can't trap them normally, because they're not making any actual damage in this sdei lavan. They're making the damage in this sdei ilan. In this sdei ilan, you can trap them normally, but in this sdei lavan, you have to make a change. Which would be a preventive mechanism to stop them from coming into the tree field and destroying it. The ketzad tzad b'shinoi. What does it look like to trap with a change? The typical trap, again, was to dig a hole and put a net over it. So the Rambam says the change you would make would be noyetz shapud ba'aretz. You would stick a stake or a thick log into the ground. Umake bekurdoim, hit it down with an axe. The achar kach menatka, and then remove the log or the stake. and then you have, the result is you've created a hole, but you haven't actively created a hole by digging it up, you've simply banged something into it and moved the dirt aside and created a hole by default. That's the shinui in which you can make that kind of a trap constructed in the nearby Sdei Lavan. Vav Kaisel Gina Shenafal. If you have a wall of a garden which fell, and the garden over here is a reference to a garden which was away from your personal property, it was just a garden and you had a wall protecting it, and the wall fell down on Chol Hamoed, Beinehu Maaseh Hedyot. You can rebuild it as an amateur would, not professional work. Or put up a loose fence of reeds or bulrushes, something like that, something light. You're not doing serious work on Chol Hamoed. Similarly, if you made a parapet, a guardrail for your roof, if you have to do it, it's a mitzvah to have a guardrail on your roof, but if you're doing it on Chol Hamoed, build it as an amateur would. But if we're talking about the wall of your actual personal courtyard, here you have a picture, this happened in England, just before COVID started in 2020, the entire wall of this family garden literally one day just tipped over. And so here, there's more of a worry. When it's in the garden's far away from your property, nobody's going to come break in, we're not worried about there's not such a big worry about robbers and burglars. So we don't allow you to build it up in a professional manner. But if it's the wall of your chatzer, your personal courtyard which fell down, you can rebuild it normally. Not only that, if you saw the wall was deteriorating, about to collapse, and Chol Hamoed, you have the authority to actually demolish it to avoid danger and rebuild it normally. A person is allowed to build on Chol Hamoed a bench to sit or to sleep on. Hatzir, a hinge, v'hatzinoir, and a drain pipe. The hakoira, and a lintel, a beam on top of the doorway. The hamanul v'hamafteach, or a lock or a key. Shenishbru. If any of these things broke on Chol Hamoed, misaknon b'moyed kedarka, you can fix them normally on Chol Hamoed. Bein b'shel barzel, bein b'shel eitz, whether we're talking about iron, hinges, drain pipes, etc., metal, or wood. Shezeh hefsed gadolhu. This goes into the category of things which are at risk of a great loss. If you're going to leave all your openings open and all your doors broken, you're actively destroying everything in your house. People are just going to walk in. So you must repair these damages right away. We've already explained, whenever we're dealing with something which has a loss involved, you don't have to do any sort of abnormal change. You can do whatever work is required normally. If a person hasn't died yet, yesterday we talked about doing all the needs of a corpse, of a dead body, that's after he has died. If a person hasn't yet died, you cannot dig a grave to be ready for the dead person when he'll die. And neither can you build the grave if there was a little bit of a monument around it or whatever. Here's just a grave dug up in a forest. But if the grave was already dug up, you can adjust it on Chol Hamoed for a person who is going to die in the future. Ketzad, what does it mean to adjust? Make it bigger, make it narrower, so it should be ready for the time when the person will need to be buried in it. But again, that's because the grave was already dug up, but you can't dig up a new grave initially. On Chol Hamoed, we're not allowed to move a corpse or bones from a decomposed corpse from one grave to another. It doesn't matter if you're moving it from a more honorable grave to a less honorable grave, or from a less honorable grave to a more honorable grave. It's all forbidden on Chol Hamoed. And the truth is, says the Rambam, it's forbidden to move a corpse or bones ever, on even another day of the calendar year. Unless you're removing him over to within his own property. As the commentators explain, it's an ancestral plot, a family plot. Then you can move a corpse or bones, because we assume the person would want to be with his family. Then you can move over a corpse or bones even from a more honorable grave to a less honorable grave, assuming the second grave is a family plot on the rest of the year. As a matter of fact, the Rambam will speak about this much more in the end of the Rambam, where he has a whole section on the laws of mourning and the laws of burial. And over there it's also mentioned that a t'nai, a condition, a stipulation that's made before the burial, also allows one for later removal. So if a person buried his dead relative and then said, verbally stipulated, I'm going to move him later when I have an opportunity to transfer him to somewhere else, maybe to Israel. It actually happened in times of COVID. Many people had wanted to be buried in Israel and they weren't able to simply because of the COVID restrictions. And people would bury them at home, in other words, locally, and they'd make a condition And later, when the opportunity arose, they actually moved many bodies to Eretz Yisrael for burial, because with a Tanai, it's allowed. But over here we're talking about without a Tanai, and that's what the Rambam is saying, that on Chol Hamoed it's never allowed, and even the rest of the year, only if it's to a family plot. Yud ein masli'in es ha'ilanos. We may not remove worms from trees on Chol Hamoed, v'lo mazhimin es hanetiyos, nor may we spray up saplings with pesticides, essentially. What's happening here? There we go. I guess the pesticides weren't so professional as we have them today, but the idea was you would apply different types of waste and it would serve for a pesticide to control bugs from getting to it. V'lei megazmin, we may not trim saplings or trees. Avol sachin es ha'ilanos v'esaperis shebahen b'shemen, but we may smear, anoint trees or the fruits growing on them with oil. This was apparently a way of getting them to ripen more quickly. V'oiker nesapishta, we may uproot flax on Chol Hamoed, because it's fitting. You'll be able to use it to cover produce on Chol Hamoed. The kaitzer nesakshus, you can also cut down hops, because it's fitting too. It's able to be used for beer on Chol Hamoed. We actually had this concept of using hops for beer earlier in the Rambam as well. Anything similar is also allowed. It's forbidden to gather in a whole flock of sheep into a pen in order to purposely make them fertilize the ground. This was customary in times of old. If you had a large farm and you had also a flock of sheep, you would bring your sheep to one place, let them eat and do whatever they have to do to create natural fertilizer. Then you move the sheep over to the next place and again repeat the process till you end up fertilizing your entire field. You cannot do that on Chol Hamoed. You're literally enriching your field on Chol Hamoed. If the sheep arrived on their own, it's permitted to leave them there and let them do whatever they do. However, you cannot help them enter the field. Neither can you appoint a guard to move the flock from place to place. But if the person you want to employ was employed not just for the day, he was employed for the week, or for the month, or for the year, or for a period of 7 years. Shavua is the entire Shemitah cycle. Then this worker, Messiah Noisan, can help them enter the field. They can also hire another guard to move the sheep around from place to place to fertilize the entire field. Why? Because here they aren't doing work uniquely to Chol Hamoed. They're doing work because they're employed for the week, which includes Chol Hamoed, or employed for the month, which includes Chol Hamoed. So it's not directly related to Chol Hamoed. Hazevel sheb b'chatzer, accumulated manure in a courtyard. Misal kenaisel it's dadin. You can move it to the sides, but you can't clear it out. Except the nasa chatzer kerefes bakar, if the courtyard becomes so full of manure that it's becoming like a barn, then meitzei naisel ashpa, you can remove all the manure to the garbage heap. Yud beis hamashve pnei karka. If a person is leveling the ground in his property, im miskaven lesaken makoim, if he's doing so with the intent to fix the place, sheyamid by krishal tvua, oishayadush by to use it, to store a grain pile or to thresh grain there, mutter, then it's allowed. You're not fixing the actual ground. You just want to clear it up so you have a place to do whatever else you have to do there. But if you had intended to cultivate the land, also then it's forbidden because you're working the land on Chol Hamoed. Similarly, if you're picking out wood chips or pieces of wood from your field, if you're doing it for collecting the wood, mutter, it's allowed. But if you want to fix the land, then it's forbidden. Same thing if you open up a channel of water into your garden. If all you want is to bring some fish into your property through the water, it's allowed. If it's to water the earth, because you're doing work on the land, it's forbidden. Similarly, if you're cutting off branches from a palm tree, if you're cutting the branches to be used as animal food to your animal mutter, then it's allowed. You aren't working the tree. But if you want to cultivate again, work the tree, then it's forbidden. Now, the Rambam just said in all these cases that it depends on your intent. How do we know what a person's intent is? It says that from a person's deeds, it can be recognized what exactly is his goal. The Rambam doesn't elaborate over here, but in the 12th book of the Rambam, on a similar note, he talks about some of these cases and tells you how you can know the intent. For example, when it comes to picking wood, if a person is only picking the thicker logs, then it's clear he wants to clear up his piece of land. But if he's picking all the pieces if he's picking the thicker logs, then it's for firewood. But if he's picking all the wood, then it's to clear his land. That's one example where you can see how a person will do something and it will reveal what his intent is. Yud Gimel, Tanor v'chirayim, an oven or a stove, she'efshar sheyivshu v'yoyfe behen b'moed, that it's possible to construct them out of clay, out of earthenware, and they will dry, and you'll be able to bake with them on Chol Hamoed. Oisin, you can actually construct the oven or the stove. But if you won't be able to use them on Chol Hamoed, ein oisin, you cannot construct them because you're doing extra work, not for the needs of the festival. Either way, you can construct on a pre-existing earthenware oven or on a pre-existing earthenware stove their upper layer. They used to have like an insulating upper layer of clay that you would build on top of the oven or stove. That can be done in Chol Hamoed. You can also weave beds. They used to have like hammock-like beds. You can weave those on Chol Hamoed. When it comes to a hand millstone, you can clean them out. You can also open the hole in the middle of the millstone. You can set the stones one on top of the other. And you can also open a water channel. If it was not a hand mill but run by a water channel, you can open up that channel also on Chol Hamoed. Yudalet. We may seal the mouth of a barrel with tar, so as not to destroy the wine inside it. You can also seal a bottle with tar because there's no work. You can seal the mouth of a jug of beer so it shouldn't get ruined. We may also cover dried figs with straw so they don't get destroyed. We can also soften clothes that were laundered by hand because that's amateur work. But we cannot tailor cuffs of the sleeves. That's professional work. Professional work is forbidden in Chol Hamoed. Anything similar, again, is governed by the same rules. It says that Rambam Tezvav, a donkey which is used to grind on your millstone, you can cut off its hooves, cut its nails. Here you see an unfortunate picture. You see on the left is long hooves of a donkey. You actually would cut them down, literally cut them, make it more comfortable for the donkey to walk around. So you can do that on Chol Hamoed. You can build a feeding trough for an animal as well on Chol Hamoed. The horse which you use for riding, you can also cut its hooves and comb its hair to make it beautiful. We may not cause animals to mate on Chol Hamoed, but we can do bloodletting for an animal if that's necessary. We don't prevent any other medicinal stuff from being administered to them. Any food or drink that are not usually eaten by healthy people, only for medicinal purposes, they may be eaten or drunk on Chol Hamoed, unlike Shabbat where we don't do medicine things. On Chol Hamoed it's allowed. We don't move from one courtyard to another during Chol Hamoed. Whether you're moving from a more disgusting locale to a nicer locale, from a nicer locale to a more disgusting locale, you cannot move on Chol Hamoed. You can move from one house to another nearby house within the same courtyard on Chol Hamoed. Any utensils that you're going to make use of during the holiday, you can bring them from the house of the craftsman who made them. So it's like pillows, blankets, jugs. But utensils that you're not going to use, they're not for the need of the festival. Like bringing back a plowshare from an iron monger, an iron person that deals with metal. Or bringing home wool from the dyer's house. And that you don't bring on Chol Hamoed because you're not going to use them on Chol Hamoed. But if the craftsman doesn't have what to eat, so for you it's not necessary, but you're paying him his literal parnasa, then that you can give him his pay, but still leave the stuff by him, only pick them up after the holiday. If you don't trust him, leave them in a house nearby. If you're worried that if you're going to leave them in a house nearby, they're going to be stolen, bring them to another nearby courtyard. Bottom line, don't bring it to your home, unless you can do it discreetly. And here we conclude the laws of Chol Hamoed, and we move on to another day that's similar, as I mentioned before, to Chol Hamoed. Yud Zayin. It's forbidden to do work on the eve of any holiday from mincha time and onwards, but a third of the day, the last third of the day, the last quarter of the day, I should say. Just like on Erev Shabbat, it's forbidden to do work. On Erev Yom Tov, you also don't do work. Anybody who does work on these days of the Eve of the holiday never will see a blessing from the work. We actually scream at him, stop him from doing work against his will. But we cannot take any action against him. We can't give him rabbinic lashes. Certainly we don't put him in excommunication on any regular Eve of the holiday. Except for the Eve of Pesach. The day before Pesach, after midday, that's even more stringent. If a person does work after midday on that day, we do put him into excommunication. And needless to say, you could give him rabbinic lashes if you didn't put him into excommunication. The day of the 14th of Nisan isn't just another eve of the holiday. It isn't a preparatory day before a holiday. It has its own holiday rites in and of itself. There's a special celebratory sacrifice. You slaughter the Korban Pesach on this day of Erev Pesach. So it becomes a holiday in its own right. And therefore, says the Rambam, Lefichach Yudches, therefore, Yom Arba Asar B'Nisan, Asar Ba'asiyas Malacha Medivrei Seifrim, K'maychule Shel Moed. The day of the 14th of Nisan is forbidden to do work, rabbinically, just like Chol Hamoed, governed by all the same rules and principles. However, in some ways, we're going to see it's more lenient than Chol Hamoed. Also in the fact that it's only forbidden to do work from halfway through the day and on, not the whole day. Shuzman Ashchita, the time when the Passover sacrifice was slaughtered. But from sunrise till midday, totally b'minhag. It depends on the custom. A place where they do work on Erev Pesach, in the morning, it's allowed to do work. And if a place where the custom is not to do work in the morning, you don't do work. And Yud says the Rambam, even in a place where they do work on Erev Pesach in the morning, don't start a new project in the morning of the 14th. Even if you can complete it before Chatzos, before midday. Only 3 types of labor, 3 types of work, where they can begin initial new projects in the morning of Erev Pesach, assuming it's a place where they do work in the morning, and they can do work till midday. They are the following: tailors, barbers, and launderers, because everybody needs this stuff, and so you can do it also in the morning. But other jobs, only if he began the project before the 14th, that's where he can conclude it in the morning till midday, assuming it's a place where they do work in the morning. Because people don't have much need for other jobs. And therefore, only if you're one of the 3, you can do work initially on Erev Pesach, otherwise you can only finish unfinished projects. Says that Rambam Halacha Chav, what if a person travels from a place where they do work on Erev Pesach morning and he arrives in a place where the custom is not to do work? Says that Rambam Lo Yaseh B'Yishuv, in the inhabited area, he should not do work, so you avoid argument. But he can continue doing work in the desert, the outside area where it's not inhabited. The commentaries explain, the Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch writes, that this only applies if the person is planning to return back to his original place. But if he's not planning to return, he must adopt the custom of this place and not do work. And if somebody travels from a place where they don't do work on Erev Pesach morning, and he comes to a place where they do work, lo yaseh, he nevertheless should retain his original stringency and not do work. We put upon him the stringencies of the place that he left, in this last case, and the stringency of the place that he came to, in the first case. If he arrives in a place where they don't do work, he also doesn't do work. Here again, the Alter Rebbe writes, only if you're not planning to return. Only if you're planning to return. If you're not planning to return, you arrived in a place where they do work, you can adopt their custom and do work. Nevertheless, in any case, if you arrived in a place where they do work and you come from a place where they don't, you should keep your custom of not doing work, but don't make it obvious that you're not doing work because you think it's actually prohibited. A person should never act differently than the local custom, so he should avoid arguments. Says the Rambam, if a person has in mind to return to his locale, he continues behaving the way of the people in his place, whether it means being more lenient or means being more strict. But again, you shouldn't make yourself obvious that you're going against what everyone else is doing, so you don't create any arguments. Now that Rambam says a couple of differences between Erev Pesach and Chol Hamoed. On the 14th day of Nisan, even after midday, one can bring and bring back utensils from the house of the craftsman, unlike Chol Hamoed, what you can't do, even though they aren't going to be used for the needs of the festival. But you can also remove manure from under the feet of an animal and take it right to the garbage heap, even though on Chol Hamoed you cannot do it till a huge amount piles up. You could also make a nest for chickens, and a tarnagoyles if a hen was brooding, was sitting on its eggs for 3 days or more, and it died, you can put another one in its place on the 14th Adar of Pesach, to avoid the loss of the eggs. But on Chol Hamoed, that's another difference. You cannot put it in. If the hen dies, leave the eggs to rot. It's too bad. But if the chicken didn't die, it simply ran away from the eggs during Chol Hamoed, then you can return it to its place, because you're not creating a new chicken here, you're just bringing it back, and that's allowed on Chol Hamoed. Says the Rambam, blessed is the merciful one, granted us assistance, Mazal Tov, for concluding the entire Hilchot, Shvitat Yom Tov, all the laws of resting on holidays.